everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about Catholic remarriage and annulments. Now, before we begin, let's start with the prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, succuteram principio et nunc et semper et secula seculorum. Amen. Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, so I definitely recommend you watch Catholic Remarriage Part 1, where we dissect the gospel scriptures about remarriage, where Christ says if you remarry, you're committing adultery. And we break down the word unchastity, because he says except for unchastity and so forth. So today we're going to talk about annulment. So let's delineate a sketch, and this might be a sketch that you can relate to if you are divorced and you were married in the Catholic Church. So annulments kind of work like this. It's not necessarily what happened during the marriage that invalidates the marriage. It's more about what were the precipitating factors that did not allow you to give full consent prior to the vows. So let's backtrack it. So let's say you were married in the Catholic Church, and let's say your spouse divorced you, and now you're in a pickle because maybe you want to remarry, but you're divorced, and the church won't allow you to remarry unless you file for annulment. And also maybe you're having that siren song, and I will call it a siren song if a denomination, the megachurch down the street's like, oh, we'll remarry you, don't worry, you're civilly divorced, we'll remarry you. And you're like, yeah, but church teaching, catechism, Jesus, so don't worry about it. No. Okay, so let's say you do want to get remarried. Now, we talked about historically, if you were divorced, you had one of two choices. You reconcile with your first husband or wife, or you just live alone or in a Josephite marriage if you remarried, and essentially just be a chaste celibate person the rest of your life. That's kind of the onus is on you. Now, you do have the option to try to get an annulment. So that is typically done locally at your parish, and you fill out the same paperwork, and they'll submit it to the tribunal of your diocese, and normally that takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to 2 years, depending on where you file. And the tribunal lawyers will essentially kind of determine whether or not, a couple of factors. So was the marriage valid sacramentally? And the way they'll determine that is a couple of things. Did you or your spouse believe in the insolubility of marriage? So, for example, if you had a spouse that's like, yeah, I'll divorce you if you do this, they clearly didn't believe in the insolubility of marriage, and so that could be grounds for annulment. An easy grounds for annulment is going to be anything under duress, shotgun wedding, oh, you had sex with my daughter, or something like that, or some sort of deception. Yeah, I promise I'll have kids with you while she's contracepting the whole time, and so forth. But more recently, especially in the last 40 years, and certainly since Vatican II, I think the angle that most of these tribunal lawyers go for is not being able to give full consent because of either some sort of addiction that you had or your spouse had, or some psychological impairment that disallowed you from giving full consent. And as a result, if you look prior to Vatican II, annulments were pretty rare. Consanguinity would have been another way to have gone, one like if you're cousins or something, like sisters, brother, sister. But prior to Vatican II, it was pretty hard to get annulment. Post-Vatican II, the rates are about 70 to 90% of Catholics who file for annulment get it. So let's say you file for annulment and you get the results. And the results are like, you get a declaration of nullity, as they would call it, and now you can remarry in the Catholic Church, so long as the person you're going to remarry in the future doesn't have their own problems. They were previously married and all these things like that. So you can remarry. Now let's say you're in that 10 to 30% of people who you get it back, and even worse, you were abandoned. It wasn't your choice to divorce. In America, we have no-fault divorce. In fact, most of the West, we have no-fault divorce. So if you sneeze the wrong way, your spouse can divorce you. And aside from the kids and losing the money and losing the kids, you could be in a bad place because you're like, I didn't ask for this. Then you file for the annulment because maybe you want to remarry or they want to remarry. And it comes in saying, no, you were in fact had a very valid sacramental marriage. What do you do at that point? Got to take up your cross like Christ says. And we have to be obedient to the church. We have to be obedient to Holy Mother Church. He who hears me hears you, as Jesus says in Luke. Whatever you bind is bound, as he says in Matthew. So these are things that we have to be obedient both ways. If the tribunal comes in and says that, yes, in fact, your first marriage or second marriage was not valid, okay, be obedient to that. But if it says it was, then you do have to take your cross. Then you have one of two choices, the choices that we talked about in the first episode, which is either reconcile with your sacramentally bound spouse or you live a chaste celibate life. Now, if you remarried prior to filing for the annulment and that verdict comes in, I know it's a very hard cross to bear, but you're expected to live a Josephite wedding, or Josephite marriage, I should say, with your second spouse. Now, don't get mad at the church. Like I mentioned in the first episode, you were the one who put yourself down that rabbit hole. You should have checked with the church to see what the situation was before you got married civilly the second time around. Lastly, what about the kids? You hear this, my kids are bastards, illegitimate kids. No, because you were married civilly, so they're not illegitimate kids. You don't have to worry about that. So guys, I just want to get a quick follow-up. Please post in the comments if you have a history like I am divorced and annulled, and it was not my choice, but I was divorced and annulled. Do you have this situation? Do you have family members who are in this situation? I'd really like to hear from you, and let me know if I missed something. Guys, please post in the comments, hit the notification, subscribe, and share button so the algorithm sends it to like-minded people. Share with like-minded people. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.